At our 20th anniversary party, in front of 200 friends, family members, and colleagues, my son stood up and exposed a secret that shattered the foundation of everything I thought I knew. He held the microphone with trembling hands, eyes flickering between me and his mother. "I can't watch this lie continue," he said, voice cracking. "Mom has another family, a second life, a little girl who's my half-sister." The room went silent. Gasps, forks dropping. My wife Elaine froze beside me, her wine glass hovering in midair. And me, I just stood there, calm, quiet. Not a single word, because unlike everyone else in the room, I already knew. But I needed to hear it come from him. I needed him to understand the truth, so he'd never question which side I was on again. You see, I'd been preparing for this day, quietly, carefully. While Elaine lied, I gathered every piece of evidence, and what happened next would leave her with nothing, and me with everything. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about how a father reclaimed his dignity, with grace, precision, and the help of the one person she never saw coming. If you've ever been blindsided by someone you trusted most, stay with me, because what I did after that microphone dropped is something she never expected. Subscribe to Revenge with Chris for true stories of calm, calculated justice. And don't forget to comment where you're watching from. My name is William Harrison. I'm 48 years old, a cardiothoracic surgeon living in Houston, Texas. For most of my adult life, I live by two principles: precision and loyalty. You don't survive in the operating room without both. I met Elaine during my surgical residency. She walked into the hospital as a fresh-faced real estate agent trying to pitch properties to the administrative board. I remember thinking, God, she's magnetic. Confident, articulate, knew how to light up a room without even trying. I didn't come from money. My parents were teachers, good people who worked hard but didn't have much. Elaine, on the other hand, had a taste for elegance, and for the first few years, I was proud to give it to her. I worked 14-hour shifts, doubled on weekends, and we moved into a gated community when I finally made partner at the hospital. She made our house look like something out of a magazine. She was great with people, built her real estate brand fast. Everyone said we were a power couple. They weren't wrong, on paper at least. Then came Tyler. My son changed my life in ways I never expected. I was terrified I'd screw it up. But from the first moment I held him, everything shifted. I started cutting back hours, choosing bedtime stories over late surgeries. Elaine said she was proud of me, supportive, even encouraged me to enjoy fatherhood more. Looking back, I realize now that encouragement gave her space. She started working more late nights, said the housing market was crazy competitive. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? We had trust, or at least I did. I missed a lot of the signs. I was too busy loving the version of her I thought was real. When Tyler turned 12, I noticed he was closer to me than her. He stopped going to open houses with her, started asking if he could stay home, said she was distracted all the time. I chalked it up to work stress. By then, I had already begun suspecting things weren't quite right. Money started disappearing from our joint account. Elaine blamed it on closing costs and staging expenses. I accepted it. She had access after all, but still, I quietly opened a separate account, just in case. Not to hide anything, but to protect something. Fast forward to a few months before our 20th anniversary, I wanted to do something big, something unforgettable, a party for the ages. I booked the ballroom at the Four Seasons, live string quartet, gourmet buffet, open bar. It was our legacy on display. I thought, maybe this would bring us back to where we started. Tyler was unusually quiet during the planning. I figured he was just being 19, moody, buried in school and social stuff. But something lingered behind his eyes, something heavy. I'd walk into a room and hear his voice stop mid-sentence. I saw him scrolling on his phone once, staring at something, jaw clenched. He quickly turned off the screen when I approached. I didn't push. I should have. The night of the party arrived. Elaine wore a navy silk dress, smiled like nothing was wrong. She kissed my cheek in front of guests, held my hand when we greeted people. The illusion was flawless. That's what Elaine was best at, presentation. We sat at the head table surrounded by friends, mentors, hospital board members, neighbors. Tyler had disappeared halfway through dinner. I figured he was outside, maybe overwhelmed. Then, the mic crackled. He stood under the spotlight, pale and shaking, and I remember gripping the table. He didn't look at his mother. He looked straight at me. What came out of his mouth would unravel everything. Tyler stood there, clutching the microphone like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't laugh nervously. He just started speaking. "I can't watch this lie continue," he said. "I found out 6 months ago that my mother, Elaine, has a second family. A man she's been living with, and a little girl, my half-sister." The room didn't gasp. It froze. Forks hovered midair. Champagne glasses trembled. The quartet stopped playing in mid-song. Elaine stared up at him, mouth slightly open, color draining from her face. It wasn't denial, it was fear. Tyler continued, his voice growing steadier as he spoke. "She has an apartment across town. I went there. I saw them together. The man kissed her right in front of the little girl, like it was normal. Like this. This wasn't our family, too." People started whispering. Some guests quietly stepped out of the ballroom, clearly unsure whether to stay. Others just watched, eyes darting between Elaine and me like they were waiting for the earth to split open beneath us. But I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam a glass. I didn't say a word. I stood, walked toward my son, placed a hand on his shoulder, and I hugged him. He broke down in my arms, years of confusion, anger, and guilt collapsing all at once. Then I took the microphone. "Thank you for your honesty," I said, voice calm but unwavering. "Please, everyone, enjoy the rest of the evening. My son and I have a few things to discuss privately." And then I led Tyler out of the room. No yelling, no accusations, just a quiet exit. Elaine didn't follow. She just sat there, lips pressed into a flat line, surrounded by people who suddenly didn't know her anymore. We sat in the car for 10 minutes before either of us spoke. "She was going to let that little girl grow up without ever knowing who I was," Tyler finally said. "She told me not to say anything, said it would ruin your life." I turned to him, looked him straight in the eyes. "No, son, she was trying to protect herself. But you just gave me the greatest gift, the truth." That night, Tyler stayed with me at the apartment I kept downtown for on-call hospital shifts. It had always been mine. Quiet, simple, untouched by her world. A place of clarity. I poured us each a glass of water. Nothing fancy, just enough to ground us. And I told him everything. How I had suspected for years. The excuses, the bank statements, the strange phone calls at night. How I hired a forensic accountant to trace the money she'd been siphoning from our accounts. How I discovered the shell company she used to funnel funds toward her second household. How I hired a divorce attorney 9 months earlier and told them to wait. I was never going to stay in the dark forever. I just needed to be sure. And now, I was. "She chose a double life, Tyler," I said, "and she chose it over both of us." He didn't say anything, just nodded, eyes still red. The next morning, Elaine came home to a locked front door and a manila envelope taped to it. Divorce papers, asset breakdown, full documentation of her financial deceit, and a handwritten note. "You lied to me for nearly a decade. I've been preparing for this moment for almost one. This is not revenge. This is release." William, I didn't expect her to respond, but of course, she did. 20 missed calls, 4 voicemails. The first was sobbing. The second was furious. The third, denial. The fourth simply said, "You can't do this to me." But she was wrong. I already had. The moment Elaine realized the locks were changed was the moment the illusion finally collapsed. She stood on the front porch, phone in one hand, the divorce papers in the other, still wearing the same dress from the party. Her mascara had smudged into thin streaks, and her shoes were in her hand, like she'd walked barefoot from her car to the door. I watched her from the upstairs window, not out of cruelty, but out of closure. She knocked once, twice, then louder. "William," she called, voice sharp, almost panicked. "Please open the door." I didn't, because the truth is, I had already opened every door I needed to, just not for her. Instead, I stood at Tyler's bedroom, watching him sleep in the same bed he'd grown up in. Peaceful, safe. For the first time in years, I felt like the father I was supposed to be. Downstairs, the knocking stopped. A minute later, I heard the wheels of her suitcase scrape the pavement. And just like that, she was gone. What followed was a legal process as precise as surgery. My attorney filed immediately, citing adultery, financial fraud, and emotional abandonment. The forensic accountant's report was airtight, over $230,000 misappropriated across 8 years. She had paid private school tuition, utilities, vacations, all for a second family I never knew existed. And still she fought. She claimed the second family wasn't serious, that she never intended to leave me, that she had only stayed with him for the child's sake. She called it a mistake. But mistakes are one-time accidents. This was a decade of premeditated deceit. In court, her attorney tried to paint her as a devoted mother who had been stretched thin and emotionally neglected by a workaholic husband. They brought up my long hours, my demanding schedule, my past absences. I didn't flinch, because the court didn't need excuses. They needed evidence, and I had it. Every deposit, every receipt, every lie documented. The judge took one look at the timeline, the transactions, and my testimony, calm, factual, emotionless, and made the ruling final. She was awarded nothing, not a dime from my pension, not a cent of spousal support, no share of the house, and most importantly, no custody over Tyler, who was legally an adult and chose to stay with me. The fallout was brutal. Elaine's reputation imploded. Her brokerage dropped her within a week. Clients canceled. Her second partner, Jared, walked out the moment she lost everything, taking their daughter with him. And yet, the strangest part? I didn't feel satisfied. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt empty. Because while she had destroyed everything we'd built, what hurt the most wasn't the betrayal. It was the years I couldn't get back. The family photos that meant nothing now. The anniversary spent toasting a lie. The father-son moments she nearly stole from me with every choice she made. That night, after the verdict was delivered, I sat on the back porch with Tyler. We didn't say much, just passed a bottle of sparkling water between us and listened to the crickets. "I never meant to ruin the party," he said suddenly. I turned to him, surprised. "You didn't ruin anything," I said. "You saved it." Because in that moment, in front of 200 people, my son did what most adults are too afraid to do. He stood up for the truth. And even though everything fell apart, that was the moment we started rebuilding something real. Something she could never touch again. Long before Tyler took the microphone at our anniversary party, long before the champagne toast turned into a funeral for our marriage, I knew something was wrong, not just suspected, knew. I'm a surgeon. I don't operate on feelings, I operate on facts. And the facts were starting to bleed through the surface. It began with small things, unexplained gaps in her schedule, withdrawals from our joint accounts with vague descriptions, client dinner, staging costs, travel expense. But the real estate office she worked for was 20 minutes from our house. Why was she putting 1,200 miles on her car every month? So I did what any man trained in patterns and anomalies would do. I started collecting data. I didn't scream. I didn't accuse. I observed, quietly, for almost a year. Every receipt, every credit card transaction, every text she left open for 2 seconds too long. And when I had enough inconsistencies to feel justified, I contacted a private investigator. He was ex-military, ex-FBI, discreet, ruthless, efficient. Within 2 weeks, he had everything. Photos of Elaine entering and leaving an apartment on the east side of town. Security footage of her shopping with a little girl. Dinner dates with the same man, 3 times a week. School records listing Elaine as the emergency contact. A registered lease in her name, hidden under a DBA shell company she created herself. She wasn't sloppy, but she wasn't smarter than me. While she was building a second life, I was building a case. My next move? A forensic accountant. I gave him access to 10 years of bank statements. What he uncovered was staggering. She had been slowly draining my earnings, strategically hiding them under real estate business write-offs. Thousands of dollars rerouted into accounts under that same DBA. She used my income to fund private ballet lessons, birthday parties, even a Disney cruise for a family I never knew existed. So I brought in my attorney. She was a bulldog, divorced 3 times, specialized in high net worth marital fraud. She looked at the file I dropped on her desk and said just 4 words. She doesn't stand a chance. We filed everything quietly. That's what no one knew at the anniversary party. I already had the final draft of the divorce agreement, already had the court date, already had the forensic breakdown ready for the judge. I just needed one last piece, confirmation from Tyler. I never expected him to be the one to expose her so publicly, but when he did, it gave me something I didn't know I needed. Moral clarity. The next morning, she came home and found the locks changed. A courier handed her the envelope and said, "You've been served." Inside was everything. Divorce petition, evidence log, statement of assets, custody waiver, affidavit of financial misconduct. She called me 3 times that morning. I didn't answer. Later that day, her lawyer called mine, tried to negotiate. My response was simple. There will be no negotiation. She can sign what's in front of her, or we can go to court, where I will make every document public record. She signed within 72 hours, but my revenge didn't stop there. It was never about money, it was about truth. I contacted the school where her secret daughter was enrolled, not to cause harm, but to ensure that all emergency contacts were reviewed because one of them still listed my medical license under guardian information. She'd used my identity to secure access for that child's insurance benefits. That was fraud. I didn't press charges. I could have. I had the grounds, but I knew the legal battle would only hurt Tyler, and the little girl didn't deserve that. Instead, I filed a legal cease and desist, removing my name from all records associated with the child. That was my line. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. Elaine was no longer my wife. She was just another person who underestimated how quiet men prepare. A month after the divorce was finalized, the dust had barely settled. Elaine moved into a smaller apartment on the edge of the city. Not the one she used to share with her secret partner, but somewhere entirely new. A fresh start, maybe, or just another escape route. I didn't care. She had nothing left from our marriage. No property, no stake in my assets, no leverage. But what she did leave behind was a daughter, Jasmine. Tyler brought her up again one evening as we sat on the back patio. He was quieter these days, older somehow. Trauma does that to a young man. "I keep thinking about her," he said. "She's just a kid, Dad, 7 years old. She didn't ask for any of this." I nodded, sipping my coffee, letting the words settle. "You've met her?" I asked. He nodded. "I went back twice. She remembers me, thinks I'm just Mommy's friend's son. She showed me a picture she drew. It's her, her mom, and me, all holding hands." My throat clenched. Elaine's betrayal cut deep, but Jasmine was a blank slate, a child raised in a lie she didn't write. And whether I liked it or not, her blood was half mine. "Do you want to bring her over?" I finally asked. Tyler blinked. "What?" "Supervised, nothing official. Just let her know someone in this world still tells the truth." The first visit was awkward. Jasmine clung to Tyler like a shadow. She barely spoke, just looked around the house like it was a museum. When I offered her juice, she whispered, "Do I call you Mr. or Daddy?" I froze. Tyler gently said, "Just William, that's fine." She nodded and gave me a tiny smile, the kind that breaks your heart. Over the next few weeks, her visits became more frequent. Tyler would pick her up, stay nearby while we played board games or watched cartoons. She was smart, observant. She asked questions like, "Why don't you and Mommy live together?" And "Do I have a dog here too?" Questions that had no easy answers. Elaine didn't object, surprisingly. Maybe she was relieved. Maybe she felt guilt. Or maybe she knew she'd lost the right to say anything. The emotional weight didn't disappear. I still had nightmares, still woke up angry some mornings. But the bitterness began to dull, like a blade laid down too long. One evening, as Jasmine colored at the kitchen table, she looked up and said, "You smile more than Mommy's other friend." I blinked. "Other friend?" She nodded. The man in the other house. He doesn't laugh. He just yells a lot. I swallowed hard. That told me more than any private investigator ever could. Elaine's perfect second life? Already cracking. I didn't gloat. Didn't feel satisfaction. Just sadness. For her, for Jasmine, for the family we could have been. A few weeks later, I was asked to speak at a local university, something I used to do often before life blew up. The lecture was about precision in surgery, but when I opened the floor for questions, a student asked something unexpected. Dr. Harrison, how do you handle pressure outside the OR? I paused, then smiled. You breathe, you plan, you never rush the incision, and you never ignore the pain. Not physical, not emotional, because ignored pain festers. Afterward, I sat alone in the empty auditorium, looking out over the rows of seats. That's when the idea hit me. A foundation, a scholarship fund for kids of fractured families. Not just financial help, but therapy access, school supplies, weekend programs, real support. I called it the Jasmine Fund. Tyler helped me set it up. Jasmine picked the logo, a hand-drawn heart with 3 people holding it up. She said it reminded her of us. In that moment, I realized revenge hadn't healed me, but grace did. And sometimes the quietest response to betrayal is the loudest one of all. 2 years have passed since that night, the night Tyler spoke the truth that changed everything. Today, our lives look very different. There's no more mansion, no more big parties. But there's peace. And peace, I've learned, is louder than applause. Tyler's thriving. He's now studying child psychology with a full scholarship. He says he wants to help kids navigate broken homes because someone should have helped me sooner. He's not angry anymore, just focused, grounded. He's become the kind of man I always hoped I'd raise. Jasmine comes over every other weekend. She calls me William, but once, just once, she called me Dad by accident. She looked at me wide-eyed, afraid she'd said something wrong. I just smiled and said, "That's okay," because it was. Elaine? She moved to another city. I hear very little from her, and that's how I prefer it. There's no malice left in me, just distance, boundaries, and a lesson learned the hardest way. I created the Jasmine Fund not just for her, but for the thousands of children caught in the crossfire of adult mistakes. It won't undo the past, but it might rewrite someone else's future. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. You don't always have to burn everything down to begin again. Sometimes the cleanest revenge is healing in a way they never expected. What did you think of this story? If you were in William's shoes, how would you have handled it? Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you support William, vote number 2. If you think he was too soft, vote number 7. And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge with Chris so you never miss a powerful new karma story every single day.